Hey guys, welcome back to another gouache painting tutorial. In this video I'll be showing you how I painted these rose leaves. So I started with a very cool toned green. Now usually I do a warmer tone color for any part of the subject matter that has more direct light, because typically sunlight makes things warmer, whereas shadows tend to have a cooler tone to them. This painting is lit by moonlight, so I'm trying to keep the overall tone of the painting pretty cool. I will mention when I'm using a warmer tone though, and any variation of tones and why I am. So I am using just a darker, very blue-green. And what I did was I basically just color blocked with a lighter version of the same color, essentially, with just a touch more yellow in it, just barely any. There was some leftover yellow in my paint pan, so I just kind of mixed that in there. My paint pan looks like a nightmare, so yeah, I have all the colors on there. Anyways, I had this at the color blocked stage where I literally just throw some colors down, and right now I'm just using a very damp paintbrush and I was just blending that out a little bit. Try to resist the urge to overblend because you'll be adding a lot more layers as you go, and as you can tell, more blending. Now what I did here was I added where I want the veins to go, and the moon is going to be on the right side. So the light is going to be hitting it right at where I put the curve on the lower part of the leaf. I kind of curved them to give like a domed effect, like how it fans out naturally and falls down from the stem. And then I am blending the darker color that I used as a base layer upwards. And I'm basically just doing that in like a U shape between each vein. Sometimes with the leaves, the part of the leaf in between the veins, they kind of pop up and then they kind of go down like a valley with each vein. It just gives more dimension and texture. Later on though, I wound up undoing this whole step because I realized I put too many veins in it, and I wanted them spaced out a bit more because rose leaves don't typically have that many veins in them. I just got a little carried away. So anyways, I'm adding the lighter color here and I end up just blending that in and making the veins more spaced out. The lighter color is essentially what I color blocked with earlier for the lighter portions, just with more white added to it. And right here, I am just blending that color down, and this really gives a nice domed effect. Later on, I will be adding a sharper highlight, a little bit lower than where I put that lighter color just now, and that makes it look like there's a sharper curl there with the leaf. I'll explain that later on though. And right here, I'm just blending with a damp brush for a while. By the way, the brush being the perfect amount of moist. I almost said moist. Well, now I just said it twice. The brush being damp and not too wet, but almost dry is really important, because if you do too much water, it's going to flood everything and just undo everything you just did. So yeah, don't do that. Just make sure it's damp, almost dry. This was when I realized I don't like how many veins are in this leaf. So I wound up scribbling out some of them in between and just had them spaced out a bit more. And I'm touching up the shadows that I wound up having to redo, and just doing that same U shape in between each vein. Great thing about gouache, and also the thing that kind of has a learning curve to it, not gonna lie, is the fact that it blends with whatever layer is underneath. And not in the same way as oils or, you know, layering with acrylic. It quite literally wets the paint underneath, like revives it and mixes it with whatever you put on top. It's kind of like you're mixing the colors for your painting as you paint. That's how I use it anyway. And I don't know, I kind of like it. I like it, but it definitely has that gray area when you're learning, where you're like, what, why is this doing this? I put this color down, and that does not look like the color that I put down. And I know that can be really frustrating, but once you get used to how gouache behaves, it gets a lot easier. And I used to hate the medium, but now it's what I paint with all the time now. So I'm just touching up some of the shadows and highlights that I wound up having to scribble out earlier with a damp brush, almost wet brush. And just making a very nice rounded shape by creating a smooth U-shaped gradient in between the veins on the leaf area of the leaf. What is that part of the leaf called? It's just the leaf. It's the papery part. I don't know. You guys know what I'm talking about though. I hope. Alright, and right here I am just building up some of these highlights right here. I wanted the highlight to start on the very top, and then as the leaf kind of curls under itself, there's going to be a harsher highlight, which really gives the illusion that it's kind of bent there, if you know what I mean. So when you're blending with gouache, I know this can be really challenging to do when you're first starting out. Like I said earlier, control how wet your brush is. Make sure it is damp, not wet, unless you're trying to undo something you just painted. I kind of treat it like the smudge tool on Photoshop or Procreate. Like if you were digitally painting and you're trying to blend two colors together, usually if you want to blend out a color, you start with that color and then you swipe outwards, like dragging that color out. It's kind of the same thing, except it's with real life. So I wanted to make this whole area of the leaf brighter because there's going to be a harsher shadow on the bottom there where it curls under. So I just grabbed that lighter green color and dragged it down, if that makes sense. I typically do this in very small, like short brush strokes, because it really allows the color to mix into the other one as I go down, almost like a stippling motion, but not really. And yeah, as you can see, that made a pretty smooth gradient. And side note, look at that shadow I was just working on that's underneath that rose petal. Notice when it's closer to the leaf, it's harsher and darker. So the line is a lot more crisp. Then as the leaf curls under and moves further away from that rose petal, the shadow kind of blurs and lightens a little bit. I honestly think that focusing on how light and shadow behaves with your subject matter in a painting, learning how to do that is, in my opinion, a little more important than learning how to do details. I think people want to jump right into details because they're like, oh, it looks realistic. When I think of a realistic portrait of a person, I think of doing every single pore on their face, when really, I would argue that getting the lighting correct is what's really going to make something look three-dimensional. And yeah, if you want to add that detail after, like go for it if you want to make something look super realistic. But if you ignore that crucial part of getting the lighting right and you just jump right into details, you're going to end up with something that feels a little bit more flat to you, and it's going to be kind of hard to figure out what's wrong with it. Like, why does this feel so flat? I remember that happening to me all the time because I didn't have a defined light source and I didn't have a strong enough reference photo to base the lighting off of. So yeah, that's just my little rant. Definitely practice studying light and shadow. I guarantee you it will take your realism to a whole other level. So as you just saw, I placed some more highlights right where that bend is in the leaf. And I do end up enhancing it a little bit more off camera later on. But I also placed a highlight in the vein, because even though the leaf dips down into the seams of the veins themselves are rounded. So that area of the leaf is going to have some light caught on it. I tried not to overdo it. I did overdo it a little bit, and I ended up blending it out a little bit later. But just something to note, the veins are round, so they are going to have a little bit of a highlight on them. And right here, I am enhancing that harsh highlight and just adding another layer of white onto that bend in the leaf, and it just looks curled under just exactly how I envisioned it. It is shiny, she has highlight, she is popping in the moonlight. Yeah. And right here I am just barely blending out those edges of the harsh highlight. That way it's not like a super crisp line like a harsh highlight you would see on metal. This is still a leaf, it's softer than metal, so the highlight is going to have some blur to the edges. And that's what I'm doing right here. It's very easy when you're at this stage of using basically just white on a highlight. It's very easy to end up over blending it, and then the whole thing is a lot lighter, and then you have to go back in with the darker colors and you're like, crap, I gotta redo this now. I just screwed it up. Doing smaller brush strokes is key. It helps you get a very smooth gradient, but it also keeps you from over blending, I promise. It is so easy to just want to try and over blend with gouache, and then you're like, geez, I've been working on this painting for what feels like hours, and I feel like I haven't gotten any further with it. Usually that's because, like, it's so easy to get caught up on a certain stage of the painting, and you end up over blending it, and you're just redoing the same cycle of over blending and then putting the same colors you just used back in because you just want everything to be smooth and perfect, when really, if you just move to the next layer and the next color you gotta do, and do smaller brush strokes, you're gonna end up blending out the layer underneath anyways. So don't be afraid to just move on and be like, okay, next I'm doing the lighter color for this area of the leaf or whatever. Anyway, so right here I'm working on the other leaves. The main one I was working on for this whole video right here in the video is essentially done. I did end up refining it a bit more, but I think you get the idea. And right here I'm just adding a warmer toned highlight right where the moon is going to be shining on the leaves, and essentially repeating the same process I did with that larger leaf. Some of the veins here will be getting a highlight. It just depends on how the light is hitting it and if, you know, they're gonna get like their moment, okay? By the way, this is a commission, and I think this is the largest gouache painting I've ever done as of yet. I plan on doing even larger ones. This one, I believe, is roughly 13 inches by 43 inches. And I had to cut this with illustration board in 3 squares for the frame. The frame has things going across it, so it's going to hide where the illustration board is cut. But I had to do that because I could not find illustration board that was just at the width I needed. Everything was like short just by a few inches, and it drove me nuts. So I was like, okay, it would make more sense if I just cut it into squares and did it that way. Yeah, anyways, I used illustration board because I think it works the best with gouache in my opinion. I have tried using other surfaces to paint on, primarily using the Daniel Smith watercolor ground. It's this paste where you can put it on almost any surface. I think you can put it on like glass, metal, wood, anything really, and it allows you to paint in watercolor or gouache on any surface. It looks like gesso. And I recently did that with a canvas board panel so that it could become more absorbent for the gouache and I could layer it a lot more. And it turned out really good, but I don't know, I'm still in love with illustration board. It's my jam. And I always get the extra thick board because it's my favorite. So yeah, I'll probably be updating my channel with some more videos specifically from this painting since it is so large. So yeah, if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you did not like it, give it a thumbs down, I guess, if you really want to. And I will see you next week. Bye!